Hello everyone, welcome or welcome back to my channel. You're watching Swathi's Commerce Tutorials. Well, if you're new to this channel, then let me tell you that I have started a new series for NTA UGC NET Commerce aspirants, and I have started the first unit of your NTA UGC NET Commerce, which is your business environment and international business. So in that we have already covered 4 sessions where I have explained you about the basic concepts of business environment, the types of business environment being macro and micro environment. And in today's class we are going to understand about the next part which is very much important for your examination point of view, which is your globalization aspect. And also we will be discussing about the drivers which will activate this business industry in order to merge into this globalization business activities. Before that, if you want to know more about the contents which I upload in this YouTube channel, then please do like, share and subscribe to my channel. And if you want to know more about the previous videos, then I have left the link for these videos in the I button up there, as well as I'll leave the link for these videos in the description box down below. So please go and check it out. Okay, then without any further ado, let us quickly start today's session, which is about globalization. Before understanding about globalization, we have to understand the new industrial policy, that is in the year 1991, which led to globalization. Well, it not only led to globalization, it also made way for three of the most important part of our economic advancement, which is your liberalization, privatization, and then globalization. So let us understand these one by one. First of all, liberalization. Here the term liberalization gives out the meaning of a liberal, where the government decided to remove all the unwanted restrictions and barriers in the international trade. What happened after this was that it made a way for free environment where the economy were more liberal, competitive and free enough in order to actively take part in the activities or the trade which is happening in the world economy. Next came the phase of privatization, where the government removed strict control and restrictions on especially the private sectors. And what happened here is that private sectors flourished in the economy because they gave much more freedom to the private sectors, and now the competition of them with the public sector reduced to quite an extent, and like this they flourished in the economy. And then came the major phase of the economy, which is the globalization, which is a major topic for today as well. Now, globalization says that it allows integration of a world or global economy with the national economy. Here, what happens is, my dear students, there is free interaction. Interaction among the economies, and also interaction in terms of trade, finance, production, technology, investments, education, and whatnot. So, after this globalization, we have seen a major advancement in the economy, and this led to various other things as well, where the rupee was devalued, foreign equity participation were raised, long-term trade policies were given, and convertibility of rupee was made possible because of this industrial policy of 1991. So this is one most important policy that decided our future economy. So now let us understand these in detail. First, I said liberalization said that something is liberalized. Now, what is being liberalized? The rules, restrictions which were majorly in the way of the private sectors or maybe the public sectors in order to take part in the business activities. They couldn't take part because there were major obstacles in their way, and when this government removed all these restrictions which were majorly acting as an obstacle for them, it paved way for them to be more freely and more actively taking part in the business activities or the trade activities. So these objectives where this liberalization focused were mainly upon making domestic industries more competitive. Because there are enhancement of the economy, there should be also enhancement of the domestic industries as well. So once the rules and restrictions has been removed, domestic industries gets a major push and they are becoming more competitive day by day. It also promoted the international trade by regulating imports and exports to other countries. That is, what happens is imports were reduced and exports were encouraged to a larger extent, and this encouraged the overall economic growth. Next, what happened is there had been international fund access. Now, not only trade access, but also we could engage our business activities in a foreign country, and we could also take part in those activities where we could raise funds from a foreign country as well. So, we had a lot more access to the international funds now. And not only the funds, we also had an access to all the new technologies which were majorly being there in the outworld, but we were not having that much amount of technology. But after this liberalization, we could have an access to these technology as well. It increased the country's worldwide market boundaries, because now not only the country could take part in the trade activities within the national boundaries, but also it could take part in the trade activities outside its national boundaries, and now the entire world was one market for these industries. Next, to become that country's economic boost, what happens is there should be a lowering in the amount of the debt which is prevailing in that country. Now we have an access to the international funds, so we can majorly tackle this problem, and the debt burden which is prevailing in the country could be reduced to a far extent. So these were the major changes which has happened after the 1991 new industrial policy, the first phase, which was the liberalization. Next comes the second phase of LPG, that is the new industrial policy, which is your privatization. Now, as I said, this is the second phase of LPG 3 policies, and this increased the access for whom? It increased the access for private sectors. Now, private sectors were given major importance here, and they were given much amount of freedom, and this freedom to enter into the international countries trade activities or fund access were made by majorly two types of ways which was provided by the government. One was by disinvestment, and the second was by removing the government's ownership and by administration of public sector business. Now let us discuss what these privatization focused on. It is government's financial status. That is, in order to improve the financial status of the government, they realized that private business can also pave a way, and also they can raise the funds for this economic growth. So that is why privatization came into the picture. Secondly, it reduced the workload of the government agencies, because now private sectors were also being allowed to take part in major of the activities which earlier was only allowed by the government. Now the workload of the government could also be reduced. Disinvestment, as I said, was one of the ways by which this privatization had to be taken place in this country, and that gave a raise of funds. Next is it effectiveness of the government agencies, because now the private agencies were also taking part in sharing the responsibility. The effectiveness of the government agencies started to increase. They provided the consumers with better and enhanced goods as well as services. It encouraged the healthy rivalry in the workplace and not unethical practices. And also the FDI in India, that is the foreign direct investment, all these started to increase day by day. And then came the phase of globalization. But before that, privatization has various forms or various stages out of which this privatization took place. So let us see them one by one. First was denationalization or strategic scale. That is the scale in which this privatization takes place. So if at all government transfers 100% control, what I am speaking about is entire control, that is 100%. If government is transferring all this control in the hands of the private, what type of privatization it is? It is denationalization, or it is a strategic scale type of privatization. Next, we can see a partial privatization or a partial scale. Now, if the word partial persists, at that time we can immediately understand it is less than 100%. It cannot be total controlled being transferred. Now, if it is less than 100%, how much more than a certain percentage will be called as a partial privatization. It is more than 50%. Okay. If the government transfers its control more than 50% but less than 100% to a private enterprise, at that time we will call it as a partial privatization or privatization under a partial scale. And the third type of privatization is known as a deficit or a token privatization. Now, a deficit or a token privatization is where government disinvests its share capital to tune 5 to 10% to cover a deficit budget. Now, what is disinvest or disinvestment means that it is selling its own shares to the general public or to the private sectors because it is trying to raise funds. Now, if you are trying to raise fund, there should be a cause for which you are trying to raise fund, is it not? Now, the cause for this is that the government is facing a deficit budget, and in order to cover that deficit budget at least for 5 to 10%, and at that time for this purpose you are making a disinvestment, you are making a privatization in terms of a deficit or a token privatization. I hope the meanings are clear for you. If you are transferring entire 100% of control to the private, it is denationalization or strategic scale privatization. If you are transferring more than 50% of the control to a private sector but it is less than 100%, you will call them as a partial privatization or a partial scale privatization. And lastly, if the government itself is facing a deficit budget and you want to raise funds by disinvesting your existing shares to the private sectors, you are making a privatization by means of deficit or token privatization. Now, I hope you have understood the major phases which has been taken place after the new industrial policy which happened in the year 1991. In that three phases, as I have said, the most important phase is globalization. Now we have discussed the meaning of globalization. Let us study the features of globalization, which is actually required for your examination point of view, because most of these MCQs has been framed either out of these features of globalization or out of the drivers of globalization. Okay. So the first feature is free trade. What did globalization give to the entire economy? It gave free trade. It increased the trade volumes, and now what happened is the government intervention was drastically reduced. Now what happened because of this lessened government intervention is that the private sectors has been given much amount of freedom, and now they can take part in these trade activities in a larger scale, and this increased the GDP, which is your gross domestic product, and it led to increase in the prosperity. Now because the GDP as well as prosperity is starting to increase in the country, as a result the overall cooperation between the governments, that is between two different countries, there was a lot amount of cooperation which was also seen. Next, after this globalization, liberalization was also seen because it was the first phase of globalization. Liberalization is a must. Now, as I said, liberalization means reduced regulations or reduced restrictions. Now, in which terms are we talking about this reduced regulation is that now it has been more flexible to take part in trade activities, and their further concession to the industries have been increased. And next, it led to job creation. Be it direct or be it indirect employment, the production process started to increase because now entire globe was one market, and so in order to cater the needs of this entire market, you have to increase your production. Now, if you are increasing your production, you should have the manpower which will back up this production. So that is why your employment opportunities started to increase worldwide, and then it increased the operational scale of these industries as well in the respective countries. Next, globalization enhanced connectivity. Connectivity because there were improved trade relations. Now, if you are making a trade continuously between one country to another, usually what happens is the interaction starts to build, and the nation, people, and business will start to correlate with each other. Now, once they are starting to correlate with each other, the connectivity will obviously be established. So, that is why there was enhanced connectivity, and it strengthened the country country's economy as well as the quality of life for the citizens who are living in that country. Then it gave the way for interdependence. It has increased countries' reliance on each other. Now they were dependent upon each other because they were seeing which country's trade will benefit us and in which ways. So now what happened is business started to explore the opportunities and started to import the cheaper raw materials for their products and export to those countries where the product had higher amount of demand. Now what happened because of this ways? The profit margin of that country's sales started to increase and the overall economic prosperity started to boom after this phase. There were cultural exchange as well because the trade activities and there was correlation between two countries and connectivity between these two countries. The ideas, behaviors, values across the nation were also encouraged and exchanged. That is why we can see that now in India we have a lot amount of demand for foreign foods or foreign delicacies as well. That is sushi from Japan has been muchly liked by Indians as well. Or if you talk about pizza, which is actually from Italy, it has found its way into the kitchens of the worldwide globe as well. Next, if we are speaking about it, paved a way for urbanization. It increased urban centers because many of these countries had economic hub where there were specific area where they were finding the amount of raw materials, so they established their industries there. And they, if the industries are established, it required housing, transportation, shopping centers, and because of this, one by one everything started to increase and slowly the urbanization started to set up in these industrial areas. Now, once the areas started to urbanize, what happens is the standard of living of the people living in those countries started to increase. The production cost started to lower down because there were cheap labor, cheap land, and raw materials available so that they can increase their efficiency of production with a lower amount of cost. They were also outsourcing a specific process to a third parties from other countries, which reduced the internal cost and improved the overall quality of the production. In the next class, we will discuss about the drivers of globalization, because if I take up these concepts in the same class, this entire class will be very lengthy and it will be difficult for you to grasp all the points which is required for your examination point of view. So I'll stop here. Before ending up this session, let me quickly sum up what and all I have discussed in today's session. Firstly, we have discussed the industrial policy, that is LPG, talking about liberalization, privatization, and globalization, where liberalization spoke about reducing the rules, restrictions, and regulations and encouraging the exports and discouraging the imports in the country. Second phase was privatization, where majorly private sectors were given major amount of importance and they were given the ownership by the government either by way of disinvestment or by removing the government ownership and by administering the public sector business. Thirdly, we have seen globalization. Before that, privatization had various forms where if you are transferring entire 100%, it becomes denationalization. If you are transferring more than 50% but less than 100% of the control to the private sectors, it is partial privatization. And if you are privatizing by the way of disinvestment, but the cause behind this privatization is to cover your deficit budget, at that time it is deficit or token privatization. Next, we have seen globalization and major features which enhanced the economic overall growth in the country, being it free trade, liberalization, job creation, enhanced connectivity, interdependence, cultural exchange, urbanization, improved the standard of living of the people living in the country, reduced the production cost, increased the amount of outsourcing of certain processes which certain countries were best at doing. And this is how we will sum up this today's class. If you like my videos, then please do like, share and subscribe to my channel. And if you want to get into touch with all the latest topics or the MCQ series which I am going to upload in this channel as well after this class, and so that you can get into touch with more amount of information for your NTA UGC NET Commerce examination. If you want to know more, then please do subscribe to my channel and watch all my previous videos, which will give you more insights to this first unit of your NTA UGC NET Commerce. Thank you for listening to this. We'll see you in the next class.